My name's Tyler. I'm with Iowa Young Birders. I'm the executive director. Really appreciate you all joining us tonight for our aerial insectivore event. We're lucky to be, as Terry mentioned, partnering with Wild Birds Unlimited here in Ames, as well as with the Octagon Center of the Arts, who currently have the famous Chimney Swift Chimney, which is right up there. Hopefully we'll see some birds go into it tonight. So what I wanted to do really quickly as we're waiting for the sun to set a bit more and we can start to see the birds was just talk a little bit about aerial insectivores, what those birds are, the birds that we see or can see here in Iowa, and then the two species that we're going to focus on a little bit for our program this evening. So let's start off with talking a little bit about what an aerial insectivore is. And what I want to do is kind of break that phrase down. So aerial, what do we mean by aerial? We fly around a lot, right? It has to do with being in the air. How about insectivore? That one's a little bit tougher. Ben, what do you think? A bird that eats insects. So if we combine aerial and insectivore, what do you think we're talking about? A bird? Go ahead. A bird or a bat. And they're probably going to be flying around while eating insects, maybe? You think that's what it means? Yes, that's exactly what it means. So the birds that we're talking about are birds that are flying around, capturing insects on the wing while they're flying, and eating them while they're flying as well. So there are some characteristics of those species of birds that are broadly applicable to the different general groups that we'll talk a little bit about. The first of which is, if any of you have seen swallows or swifts, the birds that we're looking for tonight, they have really long, pointy wings. Have you noticed that? Their wings are really long, pretty narrow, pretty pointy. Those wings are, they're made that way because they need to be very maneuverable, right? If they're chasing after bugs that can fly very quickly and are very maneuverable, they themselves also have to be very quick and maneuverable. So that's one characteristic. Another characteristic, and I wish I had a PowerPoint presentation because I have a really neat photo of a common nighthawk, another species that we're going to learn a little bit about. They have really big mouths. When they open up their beaks, their mouths are really big. Why do you suppose they need that really big opening? Any guesses? It's a pretty big target, right? They can catch those insects much easier if they have those really, really big mouths. Common nighthawks and other nightjars are really well known for their massive mouths. They have tiny little beaks, but when they open up their mouths, they're very, very large. Another characteristic of most of our aerial insectivores are things called rictal bristles. And rictal bristles I like to compare to the whiskers on the face of a cat. Everybody knows that cats have whiskers, and those whiskers are used for tactile function, right? They're used to help them feel and sense what's around them. Well, these rictal bristles are little bristles right at the base of the beak, kind of right above their, almost like above their lip and below their lip. And they're actually a type of feather. They're a modified feather that serve the function of essentially whiskers. They help them capture insects in flight. They use them primarily for tactile purposes. So things like nightjars, common nighthawks, and flycatchers are another group of aerial insectivores, are two groups of birds that are really well known for these rictal bristles. So species of aerial insectivores that we commonly see in Iowa include swallows. Who can name a swallow species that you might see in your yard or that we see in Iowa frequently? Anybody? Barn swallow, very good. Tree swallow, very good. I heard bank swallow is another one. Cliff swallows is another, so that's 4. Graham, did you have one? Anybody else? The last two are a little bit tough. One's actually not it's a swallow, but it doesn't have swallow in the name like all the others. Purple martin, very good, that's one. And then a northern rough-winged swallow is another. Bruce, am I missing any? I think that's all of them. So 6 or so species of swallows. We also have swifts, one of our birds of the night. Chimney swift is really the only species of swift that we see in Iowa on a regular basis. There are nightjars, so those are the birds I was talking about that have those really big mouths. The species that we see most commonly in Iowa are common nighthawks, which I'm hoping we'll see some tonight. They're actually migrating right now, so some of you may have been seeing very large flocks of common nighthawks flying overhead. That's pretty typical this time of year. The other 2 species we see are eastern whippoorwill. Some of you may have heard whippoorwills before in Iowa, and a chuckwill's widow, which are much less common in Iowa, mostly seen in some of the larger forested areas in southern Iowa. So those are our 3 species of nightjars. And then the last group of birds we have are the flycatchers. So there are about 11 or so species of flycatchers that we see in Iowa fairly regularly. So we're talking about birds like eastern phoebes or an eastern kingbird, if any of you have seen kingbirds. Great crested flycatchers, eastern wood pewees, those are all pretty common flycatchers that nest here in Iowa and that we see fairly regularly. So those are generally the 4 groups of birds that we're talking about when we talk about aerial insectivores. So tonight we're going to focus mostly on 2 species like I mentioned, common nighthawks, chimney swifts. Both of those species are interesting compared to some of the others in that they're pretty well adapted to urban environments. So chimney swifts, as their name implies, they really like to use chimneys for roosting and nesting. They'll also nest in hollow trees. That's actually what they nested in historically prior to all of these chimneys that we built. So the interesting story with chimney swifts, they actually started out doing quite well population-wise. They were nesting in hollow trees. As soon as we started building chimneys, the populations expanded because they were able to adapt and utilize this new hollow source of nesting habitat on the landscape. Recently, however, they've actually declined quite a bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Common nighthawks, similarly, are another species that are pretty well adapted to urban environments. In a natural setting, I guess, if you, maybe for better or worse, and we'll use that definition, in an open, kind of a natural setting, they would be nesting in open areas, grasslands, on sandbars or gravel bars, things like that. But they've actually adapted to utilize flat rooftops, primarily gravel rooftops in urban environments for nesting habitat as well. And so they've 2 species that have adapted pretty well to urban environments. However, like I mentioned before with the chimney swifts, both of these birds are species that are what are commonly referred to as common birds in steep decline, which means they were once very common, but since about the 1970s, science has shown that their populations have been declining quite drastically. For both chimney swifts and common nighthawks, their populations have declined anywhere from 62 to 67% since 1970. So very drastic declines since that time. And so there are 2 species that our scientists are very concerned about. The primary reasons for their declines are many, but most folks think that it's, for common nighthawks in particular, it's loss of habitat, which is a pretty common reason for the declines of a lot of birds that we're seeing declining now. We just have a lot of habitat changes going on the landscape that's resulting in birds having to move out or move elsewhere. For these birds, because they're aerial insectivores, I'm sure all of us are very aware of what gets sprayed on the landscape every year across the landscape. Insecticides, right? That's impacting our insect populations. There's a lot of science that's talking about how the insect populations are declining. Probably not too surprising, therefore, that we're seeing declines in some of the bird populations that rely on those insects as well. So that's another, actually for chimney swifts, that's believed to be one of the primary causes of their real drastic decline. And I was having conversations with some folks earlier this evening about how this has been an interesting year because it's been so dry. We haven't had many insects, biting insects in particular. I think I could count on one hand the number of mosquito bites I've received here in Ames, which is unbelievable to me because usually I step out in my backyard and I'm out there for 5 minutes and I have 5 mosquito bites, right? So this year has just been a really extraordinary year in terms of drought conditions. We haven't had the insects. So we've been commenting about how that's perhaps changed the aerial insectivores that we're seeing in central Iowa this year. So that's another main threat. And there are others too, like climate change, another pretty common threat to a lot of our natural resources right now, something to be concerned about. So again, this evening we're going to be hopefully looking for chimney swifts and common nighthawks, both species that are commonly seen in this downtown area. And in fact, as I mentioned before, chimney swifts utilize chimneys for roosting and nesting. So their nesting season occurs probably anywhere from May to about July, and they'll build nests actually down inside of chimneys. They'll use grasses and sticks, and they're unique in that their spit or their saliva is very sticky relative to that of other birds, and so they use that saliva to stick those materials together inside the chimney to build a nest. Their nesting season is probably over now. In fact, we probably are starting to see some chimney swifts start their southward journey to Central and South America. They're starting to migrate south. But they will also utilize these chimneys in downtown Ames, particularly the one here on the Octagon, for roosting. So what do we mean by roosting? It's basically when they're sleeping or when they're not out being active. So they'll come in to this chimney and some of the other chimneys here in downtown at night, and that's where they'll spend the night. So that's what we're hoping to do here tonight, is to see them enter, or at least see them flying around, hopefully see them enter some of these chimneys. If we do see that, it's a pretty neat sight. They'll be flying around, and all of a sudden, because they're such aerial acrobats, they'll just tuck their wings and zoop down into the chimney they go. It's pretty fun. The other neat thing about that is that chimney swifts are one of the most aerial birds that we see here in Iowa and that we see in North America, which means they spend very little time touching anything that's attached to the ground. So when you see them go into that chimney and roost, it's actually one of the few times throughout their day, or throughout their life for that matter, that they'll be touching ground. They touch ground to nest, they touch ground to roost, and that's about it. They don't even bathe on the ground. They'll swoop down and grab water and kind of splash it around themselves, and they'll keep on flying. So they bathe in the air. I wish I could do that. That would be pretty cool. Question? Yes. Would they be tired? That's a very good question. I certainly would be if I was flying around. Yeah, so I think probably the reason that chimney swifts fly into chimneys is because they can grab onto the side and take a little break from flying around all day, maybe. But birds are actually pretty well adapted to activity, to flying. They have very strong muscles, much stronger probably than many of the muscles that we have, because they're making very long flights, right? Chimney swifts are flying to South America for migration. That's pretty darn impressive. Yes, Janet.
Is it true that in China there's such a thing as chimney swift soup, bird's nest soup is made from the spit of the swifts?
Ooh, that's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Swallow. So Sean, my cameraman, is saying swallow nest soup. Marlene, is that you're agreeing? You've had it?
No, that's what we think.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, if you've had it, please share. That's not one. Okay. Any other questions about chimney swifts or common nighthawks? Marlene.
So, I know, because I know bats, I don't know birds very like some pieces I think I do, but I do know bats. And so, when they go into these roosts, they roost head down. So they roost like hanging from their, right?
Yep.
So, can you
That's a good question. So they're not head down, at least I don't think they are. Chimney swifts are interesting in that for the type of bird that they are, they have really long claws. And so they're able, like on this brick building right here, for example, that would be what the inside of that chimney looks like. They can just grab on to that brick with their claws, and they just kind of hang on more or less just like this, with their head up. What's that? And they brace with their tail, kind of like a woodpecker almost, right? Yeah, thank you, Marlene. Yes?
Does it cause a problem with plugging up chimneys?
Not to my knowledge, no. No. Because they're on the surface, I don't think they'll kind of pile up on top of each other, so I don't know that they would really cause any problems. They're noisy. That's probably about the only problem that they would cause. Yeah. Yes. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. They could, but let's think about it. So that's a good thought. When do we build fires typically? In the wintertime, right? Chimney swifts aren't here in the wintertime. They only nest in the summer when fires probably aren't being built in fireplaces. So chances are they're not going to have issues with smoke, right? That's a really good thought. Maybe that's why chimney swifts migrate, because they're like, hey, we can't hang out in chimneys and there's fires in there, right? They don't want to do that.
Between those two, I'm sorry, what's the So between what you two just talked about was something that we've seen as well as the military. And when people don't cap their chimneys and don't clean their chimneys, they're back end of birds that utilize chimneys. But then if you use the chimney for your fire in the wintertime, and the soot builds up on the inside of the chimney, and you don't clean that, then those nests can't stick to the brick. So the soot will prevent the nest from sticking, and then you get nest falls into the fire pit, and that's how we end up with nesting So always clean your chimneys after that soot.
Marlene, can you introduce yourself?
I already said happy birthday.
So Marlene Erzman, everyone, is the executive director of the Iowa Wildlife Center, which is based here in Ames. Wildlife rehabilitation, owner and manager of Wild Way, which is a fantastic nature area, private nature area out by Ledges State Park. What am I missing? Knows tons about bats. Her counterpart, Bruce, is one of my mentors and knows a ton, capitalized ton, about birds, far more than I do. So we're lucky to have them with us tonight.
That's the cool thing, is being able to work together with people like Tyler and Jerry. That's what makes it all and these guys.
Question?
How do they not hit their heads when they go in?
Woo, good question.
If they miss at all, they're gonna whack themselves on the head.
I know.
That's gonna hurt.
I don't know how they don't do that, other than that they're well practiced, I think.
They don't echo. They don't do echolocation.
No, not to my knowledge anyway. There's a lot that's not known about chimney swifts. Surprisingly, they're a pretty hard bird to study because they don't touch ground very often, right? They're always on the wing, so they're hard to study. So a few things, what I want to do really quickly, folks, and we'll take some more questions. Actually, I'm hearing a chimney swift right above us here, so that's good. Chimney swifts right there, everybody. So now I expect you all to be looking that way and not at me, and I'll just keep talking while you watch the birds really quick. So a few things that some of us have been talking about doing here in Ames, because we're interested in learning more about chimney swifts and what we can do to help them, as we've been considering some things to help others learn more about chimney swifts, and we're lucky to have a great partner like Terry from the Octagon here to help us do this. So a lot lots of questions about how they enter chimneys, right? And what do they do once they get in there? So we've been toying with the idea of actually putting a camera on top of the Octagon chimney so that we can see them flying around and see them fly down in. We have not yet established a proof of this concept, but this is just kind of an idea that we've been kicking around. The other things that what's that? So we're hoping to put one kind of in the chimney that's shooting up and one that's shooting down, so you can see up and see down. Well, that hasn't been established yet, but I vote Todd. So we'll see. I don't want to get everybody's hopes up, but we've been thinking about some of these things. More importantly, though, I think what we've really been talking about doing is figuring out how we could maybe recruit some volunteers that are interested in helping us learn more about the chimney swifts here in Ames by just monitoring chimney swifts, whether it be coming down here during migration and counting the chimney swifts that we're seeing going into chimneys for roosting. There are some cities that actually will recruit volunteers to monitor chimneys all over the city. So if you see chimney swifts going into a chimney, you can record that. Obviously, we can't really monitor the nests inside of chimneys. That's a bit hard, but at least knowing where they're nesting and how that changes through time can be really helpful in us learning a bit more about what's happening with chimney swifts here in Ames. There's lots of other things that I think we could do as well. So if you're interested in helping out with any of that, obviously we're at the tail end of the season this year, so most of this probably wouldn't really start until next summer and fall. But if you're interested in helping out with that, Todd, Steph at Wild Birds Unlimited, and myself, I think most of you probably have my email since I emailed some of you about this event. If you're interested in that, please send me an email, because we are kind of at the point where we'd like to know if there are folks that would be interested in helping us with that effort.
So, as the chimney swifts migrate, then they'll sleep in a different chimney every night, and do they have like one chimney there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're obviously going to different chimneys as they migrate, right? Whether there are other chimneys like the Octagon chimney in other cities is, I think, largely unknown. We really don't know if they're using, if they have a path of chimneys that they're using, or if they're just kind of going in chimneys that they find, or hollow trees for that matter. They'll roost in hollow trees as well. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So they asked if there's any efforts to make artificial chimneys, and that's actually, there's a really big effort to do that across the United States. There are chimney swift towers that you can build, artificial chimneys out of wood that chimneys will use for nesting and roosting. And in fact, Iowa has a really neat history regarding chimney swift towers, in that Althea Sherman, who was a school teacher turned scientist from northeast Iowa, is actually the woman that developed the initial design for those artificial chimneys for chimney swifts. And in fact, her original chimney that she built still stands in Clayton County, I believe. Is that right, Bruce? Oh, is it near Iowa City? Oh, that's right. Yeah, it's near Iowa City now. But her chimneys actually resulted in some of the first research that was ever done on chimney swifts, and what we learned about how they nest and how many chicks do they raise, what their nest looks like. So that's kind of a neat history that we have here in Iowa, which in my opinion, I think makes it more important for us as Iowa citizens to kind of take these birds under our wings, so to speak, and learn more about them. Yes. Well, I would assume yes. I don't know that for sure, but I mean, we see chimney swifts in Ames throughout the summer, and so that to me indicates that they're nesting somewhere. And I've seen chimney swifts during the summer enter chimneys here in downtown Ames. So presumably yes, they're nesting all over the city probably. where there are chimneys? Yes. Hold on one second. So indulge my bird humor. That was a northern gas hawk. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you over the plane. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean they're an urban bird, so I think any town that has chimneys, chances are you're gonna find chimney swifts for sure. A lot of newer chimneys do, but I think on some of the older buildings they're mostly open. Marlene, you might be able to comment on that a little bit better than I could.
Well, I think that, yeah, a lot of the newer chimneys are capped with automatic, so it's keeping that hold out. That's a big part of it. It's not so much the terrain on it, the jam inside. And our chimney, where we
Graham.
used to live, was not capped, and everyone was kind of asking chimney sweep. So, I think that, but there's these that will cap your chimney, if you don't want animals, but they're in your chimney, like squirrels and raccoons and so that's the reason people start capping it.
So Marlene, can I ask you a question? So I've been down here watching the swifts, and by default then I'm also watching the bats. And I've noticed that as soon as the chimney swifts go in, I start seeing bats flying around. Is that them? Are the bats are coming out? They're like, okay, you guys can have the chimney now.
You know, I don't, that's a really good question. Terry and I talked about wondering if bats would be roosting in there, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
So is that like submarine hot funky then?
What's that?
Is that like submarine hot funky?
Yeah, right.
Comes in and out, takes
Right. They're just rotating out. Yeah, they could be. Couple more questions, and then I think we'll take some time to look at birds. Yes. Never mind. I think so, but I've been down here at night to watch them, but I've never been down in the morning to watch them leave.
The camera's sounding better and better every day.
I know. Not that I don't love coming down here every night, but it sure would be nice to just watch it from my couch.
Nothing on the bed.
Yeah, that's right. We have a volunteer, everyone. Ben has volunteered to climb inside the chimney for us. You'll have to sign a waiver. That's right. All right, everyone. Well, thanks. Oh, questions? More questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll walk around here a bit and look for chimney swifts and nighthawks now that it's getting closer to sunset. And bats. Thank you, Terry. Really quickly, again, I just want to thank Terry and the folks at the Octagon Center for the Arts, as well as Todd and Stephanie with Wild Birds Unlimited and Ames for being our partners tonight. Without them, this event couldn't be possible. So really grateful to them for allowing us to do this. Grateful to you all for your flexibility and allowing us to change the order of the night a little bit. And I think let's enjoy the stars of the evening now for a bit, and I'll be quiet.